physical level. You can't just go decide, I'm going to do the golf swing like this, or I'm going to have my running form be like that. You got to work with what your body's got going on. Everyone's limited by their structural patterns, everyone. And so it's a question of, well, if you're running into difficulty doing a certain movement, it's not because you're not getting it in your head, right, mentally, necessarily. Very often it's because your body simply won't move that way. And why won't it move that way? Because you run into fascial restriction. And then you can't just will your fascial tissue to let go. And so it again, like I said before, it just ends up being this list of paradigms where it's obvious to me, like, people are looking at it wrong. They don't even consider the fascial restriction. And then for the people that do, they think they are going to stretch it. They're going to fix it by stretching. And it's like, good luck. Or they think, I'm going to get it massaged. And it's like, the results are fairly limited with that.
But again, like, that's the context people are in, is that, like, limited results are, like, the most significant results.
Yeah, I mean, but it doesn't mean that now they can perform the correct movement.
Right.
And then the other, another paradigm is where they think they need to strengthen the weak muscle groups. And it's like, that's not accurate. Normal daily movement will strengthen the muscles that need to be strengthened. I've never in my 26 years of doing rolfing seen someone where there's just certain muscles that are weak, and if you strengthen those muscles, then it'll fix the problem. It just doesn't happen because the paradigm's wrong. Because the problem is that something's too short, and there's these pairs of tissues in the body, agonist and antagonist. They work against each other. Your bicep and your tricep work in opposite directions, and we have that throughout the body. And if a certain area is too short, shortening the opposite side does not fix the problem. It compresses the joint. And it's just like that paradigm right there. It's like, if you really understood what I'm saying right there, that shortening the other side, right? Something's too short, so then you shorten its opposite, does not fix the problem.
Just to clarify, so you're talking about strengthening something shortens it.
Yeah, that's right. Everyone, when they're talking strengthening, what they're really thinking needs to happen or does happen there is shortening.
Yeah.
And that's not where the problem is. The problem is in the tissue that's too short to begin with, which is the opposing tissue. So if your bicep's too short, shortening your tricep isn't the fix. If your hamstrings are too short, shortening your quadriceps is not the fix. If your back's too short, shortening your front is not the fix. It just compresses the whole structure. If your back's too short, shortening the front doesn't make it so now your back can lengthen. Does that make sense in your mind? Are you able to sort of picture that?
Yeah, I can feel it in different parts of my body, like while you're talking about it. As is often the case, I don't know if you're bringing up these examples because, like, you sense them in me. Or, like, it's always like, what's the line between what's personal and what, whatever you're bringing up that day.
Right.
But the I mean, I can just see it in my mind that, like, if one side's too short and you shorten the other, it's just making this, like, ball.
Yeah, right.
It's just collapsing in on itself.
Well, yes, and what gives when you do that? Well, the joint. So then you get grinding away of joints, which leads to joint replacement, a need for joint replacement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, hello, what are we doing here? The whole world is doing it the way I just described.
Just a booming titanium industry.
Exactly. But you go back to, okay, fine, let's say you believe that. And it's like, all right, how do I lengthen the fascial tissue? Show me what stretch to do. It's like, no, it's not stretching. Well, show me what, like, massage or whatever to get done. It's like, nope. Well, what do I have to do? You have to face your worst fears and heal deep-seated trauma in your psyche that you don't even really know is there. And in the process, you'll kind of go insane and might end up in the hospital for a little while.
But your golf swing will be
But
incredible.
your golf swing's going to kick ass at the end of it. 25 years from now, you're going to crush that golf ball. And believe me, I've got clients that have been with me for 20 years that would
Great golfers.
That are golfers that would that have been on that journey. And not because they signed up for the 20, 25-year journey at the start, but because they come back again because they try a bunch of other shit. It doesn't work. But they do notice that when they work with me, there's a little bit of improvement. You know, they get certain improvements, certain changes that they don't get elsewhere. So then they keep coming back. You know, and I stand by it because it's been the same in my body, you know, so I know how it works. And it's like, it's this really weird position to be in. I've probably said this stuff before, but it's a weird position to be in because, you know, it's like someone will come in, and of course they only come in when they're absolutely desperate and have tried everything else. And they hear that I do this, you know, weird, you know, when someone's referring me, it's like, well, what does he do? Well, I don't really know. Well, you know, he just kind of stands there and, you know, looks at me. And it's like, okay, yeah, no thanks. But for the people that come in, most often I can see the pattern, and it's like what I honestly want to say and do say to some degree is like, I can see what's going on. And yes, this problem, I don't think it's going to get better if you try other stuff. And it's just going to get worse and worse. And you're going to have to get surgery and get, you know, joints fused and this and that. And it's going to just, you know, go in a bad direction from here on out. Or we can start working together. I can start doing the stuff I do. So that's just a weird thing to say. It's like, yeah, I'm the only one in the world that can help you, you know, is what it sounds like. And it's like, I'm not saying Rolfing, like there's a lot of wonderful Rolfers and wonderful things that happen with Rolfing. Same with chiropractic, same with every modality out there. But there's a lot of stuff where, like I said, it's like, no, this is a combination of deep-seated past trauma, paradigms, character structure, you know, energetic stuff going on. And if you're actually going to get to where you can run again, or if you're actually going to not have to have that joint replacement, or if you're going to do something that's not actually just compensatory, it's like, well, then you're going to have to face this super deep stuff. And what's needed in that is, you know, is the psychological work, the energy work, the somatic work, the consciousness work. It's like, that's all going to be a part of that. And then, you know, and then I'm saying, and then most people out there don't do a combination of all those things.
Right.
So it's hard to find someone who does. And you can go to 10 different people. The industry is segregated into these different things, which makes it tougher.
Right.
So anyway, I guess my point is just to have that paradigm, to come to an understanding that, look, it's not just, you know, well, what's the fix? And even my clients, you know, it's like, they'll come in, they'll be like, well, you know, I'm still getting some like pain in my elbow. And it's like, it's just hard for people to understand. Like, this is, you know, it's like someone saying in their golf game, like, I'm still sometimes slicing it into the woods. And it's like, you know, like this is the paradigm's off. As far as just like fixing someone's.
Talk more about that. Talk about like, how do you, so I'm sure you get that all the time. The language we talk about issues with to like medical professionals is like, here are my symptoms.
Right.
And the expectation is like, these symptoms, you're here, like you're there to fix these symptoms.
Right.
And what you've always said is you're there to fix the cause.
Yeah.
And the symptoms may continue. And so, but just talk about that differentiation that you have to make between symptoms and cause, but also like what the continuation of those symptoms means.
Yeah. Well, just on a purely physical level, and again, classical physics, with regard to a tensegrity structure, when you're trying to get changes in the tensegral structure that are aimed, obviously, at improving the overall integrity of the structure, there's a zillion moving parts, and you get some change of a certain kind, and now the whole structure starts to adjust. And as it adjusts, you might notice that, oh, your ankle has a little bit more mobility now, but now your low back hurts. And it's like, that's not evidence of going the wrong way. It's part of the process of the body reorganizing itself, working its way back towards the ideal state. So what structures are taking load, when you're moving around? It's like that's changing as you get these changes. And that's just on the physical level, just that as the body is adapting and reorganizing and shifting and changing, you get all these subtle little shifts in how the line of force travels through the body. And just tracking it on the level of, well, does anything hurt? Or is anything sore? It's like that. You can't track it that way.
Right.
And I mean, you can, but that's just going to be an exercise in futility.
How much of an explanation do you give as far as, so let's say it's an ankle issue.
Yeah.
Initially, someone's coming through. How much of an explanation, just because for context, we've talked a lot about the physical work on this podcast, but my work with you hasn't been about that for a really long time. And I've done some of it more recently, but as far as how you normally kind of work with people on this, I still don't really know. How much of an explanation do you give about what this, what you just said, how the line of force travels through the body? If someone comes with an ankle,
right? Do
you kind of preface here's the next thing that might happen?
So with each person, I would like to do that, but I'm always gauging what's a person open to. What are they willing to listen to? It varies person to person. Some people have a more analytical mind, and they want to know, and they ask questions that are relevant, and so we talk about it. Other clients, I mean, they don't want to know, or they keep asking questions but they're not really hearing what I'm saying. They don't really understand tensegrity. And it's like, if you don't understand tensegrity, and when I say understand it, I just mean to be able to, picture in your mind and have a comprehension of tensegrity, of a tensegral structure versus a compressional structure. It's like, if you can't understand that, the conversation's over as far as trying to go somewhere from there. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I think I can feel the frustration with that. But I think what I wonder is for your clients, I think obviously we're trying to talk about it here and try to give some sense of the overarching structure and potential of what can happen. And if I'm coming from a context where all I've ever had is my symptoms treated, and it just seems to be one symptom into another, what's the kind of hurdle for you? Obviously you feel a hurdle in trying to explain it too much too soon, but kind of the hurdle of expectation of this should be getting better. And because I know that people come and work with you, and after one session, things feel better in a way.
Yeah, that's often the case.
But then, yeah, there's an immediate shift for people because you're addressing something that's never been addressed. But how do you kind of give people enough hope that the next symptom isn't still the issue?
Yeah, that's this constant kind of struggle. And some people, I mean, I don't even know how to answer that, because that's the problem. I mean, it just varies person to person, and I try to speak about it in different ways that they seem like they might that they seem to be getting what I'm saying.
It's the whole skillful means thing.
Yeah, right. It's a really interesting, surprising thing, the way our psyches work, where, again, we have these preset ideas, and to try to explain something to someone where it's like, but you're saying, okay, but the premise you're starting from is I'm actually challenging that, right?
Yeah.
And for someone to actually stop and go, oh, okay, well, let's have that conversation then. Like most people won't do that. They don't realize they're not doing that, but they just kind of nod their head and act like they heard you, or they're with you, or you're actually, and it's like, no, you're still having the conversation as though this certain premise was the case. And it's like, we got to go back to this premise. I'm challenging this certain premise. Then they continue the conversation as though that premise was agreed upon.
So it's kind of, there's a couple different things there. Like one thing you said was like, some people don't want to know. And like, to me, I heard like, well, then it's magic. It's just a shift in your perception of the problems.
Right.
It's kind of like an intermediate thing. So you're thinking about the ankle to the lower back. If you identify with the ankle and then the lower back, it seems like the same problem. But if your perspective shifts on what a physical feeling is, then it's not the same problem. Like if, oh, my ankle hurts, I broke my ankle, or not necessarily you broke your ankle, but like, oh, my ankle hurts, is that a sign of some tensegral issue, or is that just a symptom of like, my ankle doesn't work now? There's a shift around like the significance of that physical feeling is.
Yeah.
Once you're outside of the dimension of just the ankle.
Right. Yeah, it becomes this systemic type issue as opposed to an isolated.
But then it also becomes like, if that happens again, a sign, like there's a new context for it. When you work with people, let's say, so there's kind of this initial level, could just be magic. It's another level where they want to understand the system, but then maybe they keep asking questions that indicate they still don't get what this other dimension is.
Right.
When people start to see it as a different dimension that they can be a more like collaborative force in, what does that look like?
Say that again.
So like, let's say when people start asking you questions that indicate what you're trying to talk about versus trying to operate from the same premises that they hold as true that you don't see as true. Let's say they start to like give those up. What does that look like? And how does the work change at that point?
Well, like you said, it gets more collaborative. It gets to where we can start discussing what's happening in the moment. An analogy is your stereotypical thing in therapy, right? Where the person will say, the therapist will say, "How do you feel about that?" And then the person will state some thought. Well, I just think that, my boss is an asshole. And it's like, yeah, but how are you feeling, right? And let's say that the therapist is trying to get at that maybe the person feels angry, or maybe they feel hurt, or maybe they feel rejected, or maybe they feel abandoned or disrespected. But the person just is like, well, I just think I need to quit. It's like, okay, but what's the feeling you're having? Well, I just, feel like I deserve better than this. Okay, but like, can we get into an actual in the moment embodied emotional empathic experience, or is the person just going to keep coming with a bunch of concepts, right? And that's our tendency. It's like we orient conceptually, and we're going to find the right concept or find the right action to take to fix the feeling, but there's a tendency to not just look at the actual feeling directly, right?
Yeah.
And this idea of like, no, I don't want to come back and sit with and bring consciousness to my hurt or my embarrassment. I want to fix the goddamn problem so that I don't feel that way. And it's like this very different paradigm. It's like, okay, but in certain situations, because there's certain situations where, yes, if your foot hurts and it's because, it's caught, in the car door, it's like, all right, you should get the car door. You should get it out of the car door. But if your foot hurts and you can't figure out why, and it's hurt for 6 weeks, it's like you should quit looking around your environment for why does your foot hurt, and start looking more internally. And it's like, and if you feel, all these things we feel emotionally and mentally, Instead of trying to get the world around you to change, it's what's going on internally, right?
Right.
And
or even just it's not isolated to your foot.
Yeah, right.
That like you have a body of like support and interconnectedness and like causes, and like you're looking at just your foot to fix itself and like blaming your foot for how it feels.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then let's do surgery on the foot, or let's get better arch supports, or let's.
Right.
It's just ridiculous. But it's a different paradigm to say. It's not just a different paradigm. You have to take this literally different. You got to orient, anchor, and identify your attention differently. Yeah. That's the shift. That's what has to shift. And that's the nature of what I'm calling the dimension approach.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's always the case with every single thing. It's like, obviously there's times where it's not about that. But
right.
A lot of the time it's about that. A lot of the time. But what does that mean, right? To shift, how are you orienting your attention? How are you anchoring it? Where are you identifying? Because that's not change your concept. It's a literal, in the moment, experiential activity to do the thing I'm talking about. Are you looking at a thing or not? Right? That's this shift. It's not what are you thinking about the object. It's not what angle are you looking at it from. It's like it has a huge effect with regard to our experience, with regard to our functionality. How are we orienting, anchoring, and identifying our attention? If you're on a bike, or if you're driving a car, you need to be in this orientation where you're anchoring your attention out, on the road, right? And the various things you need to pay attention to while you're driving. And you need to have this reference point that is your vehicle, right? And your reference point can't be your body, because your car is extending way out beyond your body. And so you're going to run into stuff if you're just having it be your body, right?
Yeah.
In your mind, you got to be aware of, okay, what are the parameters of this car? Where are the bumpers? And then everything you're doing is related to that, right? So when you're driving past another car, especially on these skinny, like in South Minneapolis where I'm at, there's these skinny residential streets, and you get people just hauling ass. And I swear, there's like 3 inches of space between,
Yeah.
And so you got to be able to reference, like, how close is the right side of my car to those cars parked on that side of the street? And how close is the left side of my car to the oncoming car? And you need to be pretty right on, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that's this thing we do in our head. Whereas when you get out of your car and you start walking, well, now you're aware that instead of the width of your car, now it's just the width of your body as far as navigating, through physical space. And we do it rather seamlessly in most cases, right? We're referencing ourselves, or we're anchoring where we need to, and we're orienting, and then we get around, and we get from here to there safely. And I'm saying but that kind of perceptual shifting is highly variable, and we get into fixed patterns with it that we don't realize. So that fixed pattern of how we're orienting, how we're anchoring, and how we're identifying can be very functional in a certain activity. But if you stay in that same mode and now try to go into some other context or some other activity, it can be disastrous, or at least frustrating. And so it's the same with when I'm talking about working on just understanding the physical body and how it works. If the very shift I'm trying to help happen is how the person's orienting their attention in relation to their body. But again, it's a very different thing. It's like trying to teach someone to swim versus teach someone to walk. It's like it's a whole different medium that you're in when you leave dry land and get in the water. So a bunch of the rules when you're just standing on dry land, it just doesn't apply now if you're swimming in the water. And so when you shift to talking about subtle energy, it's like a shift to swimming versus standing. It's like you can't work with the subtle or the imaginal and still be coming from the dry land perspective. It's like, no, you got to let go of all that and and it's this whole different game. But that's a big part of the problem is people's minds. You have an imaginal experience surface and you think it's real. Meaning you think it's, cognitive, rational, three-dimensional space-time.
Right.
It's like, no. Just like if you think the dream you had last night really happened. Right? Like there's that experience. I know a lot of people, I've had this, people have talked about, it's like you have a dream that your partner cheats on you.
Yeah.
And you get up in the morning and you're just pissed at your partner.
For sure.
Like, how could you? And even when it was a dream, you're still pissed.
Yeah.
Because our minds are trying to discern, because it felt so real. And it brought up very real feelings. And what am I supposed to do with these very real feelings now? But again, it's like parsing out these realms, parsing out these dimensions, and noticing how are you anchoring, orienting, and identifying, witnessing, holding, containing, mirroring, and contacting, differentiating those, understanding the individuation, the psychological individuation process, and understanding the different phases of that. It's like we're just acting like that's all one thing. We're not separating these things out. We just kind of go with it, which again is like looking at your computer screen and not paying any attention to what window you have open or what folder you have open. You're just like, well, here, this is what's on my screen. It's like, yeah, but you got to have an understanding that what's on your screen is a very different thing than having an understanding of folders and windows and what software program are you in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't just be in the screen you're in and make whatever the fuck you want to have happen. Sometimes you got to switch windows or programs or get in a different folder.
Having the screen just running, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're saying, like no sense of it's a screen, no sense of the content here can change. It's just whatever content is up and on, and that's life.
Right.
And the sense of when you're talking about the car analogy and your sense of self extending beyond your physical body to the car in order to drive the car appropriately. I think for me, that's a very good kind of visceral example of how that could go wrong. If you bring that example back to the body itself, not being really aware of the body and where the body is, and thinking that there's you're talking about individuation, but there's this the way in which you relate to your body. I'm trying to think how to describe it. It just kind of like struck me that like you could not even have a sense of the outer edges of your body that you do of the car. Like you could have a better sense of like where your car is. Yeah, than where parts of your body are.
Right.
Because like so it's again, like your screen is open, things are on. That's your operating context for orienting, anchoring, and identifying. And even like, well, the screen, the computer example, that can change, like what's there and like where you're orienting from changes. But those patterns that we're operating from don't even incorporate, like it seems so fundamental, right? Like that your body is, you've had it your whole life. You think you relate to it in a set and like way, and like that's just how it is.
Yeah.
To like actually orient from your body is a destabilizing experience to that pattern that you're talking about. So like before you even get into subtle and imaginal, there's just like gross physical things that aren't even experienced, that are just kind of assumed. Yeah. That like for me it was like a major shift to like see that I'm not even like, I don't even know where my toes are.
Right.
So so someone comes in, you see the pattern they're operating from. Mm-hmm. When you say you see the pattern, it's not just like the pattern of the injury. You see the pattern of where they're operating from.
Right.
You see where they're anchoring, orienting, and identifying.
Right.
What's the first thing you try to draw attention to in that? And that, try is the wrong word. Like we're going to use some like kind of, I'm using some terms that don't necessarily give light to the light or like imply like the role of consciousness and that you're a passenger to this experience, but talk about, what the usual kind of steps are.
Because I'm like Yoda. I don't try. I just do.
Right. There is no try.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Let me just back up real quick and just make one little point.
Okay.
The thing you're saying about people will tend to have more of an idea of the parameters and boundaries of their car than they do their own gross physical body. I think that's true. But what's even way more true is they're almost completely oblivious to what their subtle field is doing.
I wasn't even going to get into that.
Yeah, I mean, their emotional self, their sexual self, their anger, their sense of arrogance and entitlement, their just on and on and on. We're just like a sloppy mess. And then when someone is taking offense or feeling invaded or feeling, it's all this like invisible stuff that just gets argued about.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway.
No, I mean, that's a great point. I thought we'd just try to keep it to the physical body.
Yeah. And as we all know, it's like a lot of people, they don't even know where the boundaries of the sound of their voice, right? Mm. Either that or they don't care.
Do you have pet peeves about people's subtle body?
I have my certain ways I don't like being invaded or bullied. I feel bullied when someone gets on the elevator and just starts talking at a volume that I'm like stuck being in their conversation.
For sure. But that's like a gross, like that's like a physical, like that's sound.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then I'm like, now you're just having me wondering, like, do you have like things that people do with their like?
Yes, but I don't think any more than anyone else. I just might be aware of which chakra it is.
Yeah, but I think that's like we don't have to go into it now. I'm gonna take a note. Like I think that's like a funny way of talking about it. Is like, I hate being invaded by a third chakra in this way, and this is what it looks like.
Yeah, I definitely have mine. I don't, and yes, that hits it on the head. I don't like it when someone does a third chakra.
Anything towards me.
Yeah. Don't even look at me from your third chakra. But yeah, third chakra, there's a place for it, right? Like if you're in a leader position and you're saying, all right, everybody follow me, we're going to run over there. Like, okay, that's cool. Like that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But when someone's doing that and it's not a situation where you're going for that, then I'm a person where my third chakra is like, oh no, you don't. Like and to a fault, I'll step up and match it. And then suddenly there's hostility.
Suddenly, who knows where it came from?
Yeah, right, out of nowhere. And the same physically. Even worse physically, if someone's first chakra is doing that kind of thing, I react to it rather than consciously respond to it. I'll notice my field just
triggered.
Yeah, my response is to push back.
Yeah,
which is different than God. This guy's being really like invasive or kind of bullying with his physical space, or Instead, it's like,
I'll show you what bullying physical space looks like.
One time in an elevator, and I'd had a little bit to drink, and I was in an elevator, and this person is doing the thing where they're on the phone and just talking loud, and I pulled out my phone and acted like I was taking a call, even though I wasn't.
Yeah.
And I was largely trying to entertain the person that I was with, because but I pulled out my phone and I was like, "Hey, how's it going? Oh wait, sorry, it's hard to hear you right now. It's really loud in this elevator. But so what's going on tonight?" And the person like stopped and looked at me and like I was insane.
Yeah.
And I was trying to do the exact volume that he was doing.
Yeah. Right.
But he looked at me like I had just suddenly punched him in the face or something.
Yeah.
And I looked at him, and it was, and I could tell he was all confused.
Yeah. Because it was totally unconscious on his part.
Yeah, right.
It's just me. That's how I talk on the phone.
Yeah.
Who's this jackass?
Right. I was the jackass. And I feel that way in my first chakra. When someone's doing the equivalent of that, I tend to just go right into matching it.
Yeah.
And same with my third. There's
no funny bit involved.
Yeah, right. Right. No, the hostility tends to be, there tends to be nothing funny about it. But again, people will think, oh, Lance aggressed at me. And I'm like, no, I didn't. Yeah. I just fucking met you in the middle and got you to,
bring awareness to.
Right.
Really, I did you a favor.
That's right. That's right.
Back to the question I originally asked before the pet peeve sidetrack that I think we should come back to, because I do think that
well, I'm all triggered now.
Yeah, I can feel it. I love it. It's pretty funny. I was immediately transported to that elevator, and I thought it was hilarious. Honestly, it was a mirroring exercise. It's pretty impressive. You jump straight to mirroring before ever any of the other stuff.
Very good point. Very good point. I should have witnessed. The elevator ride wasn't going to be long enough, Jeff. I didn't have time. I didn't have time.
Yeah. But what I guarantee you happened is years later, he's telling that story, and they're like, that you talk really loud on the phone, right? And he's like, shit.
I hope that's happening.
No, I'm sure it did. He still does it, but
I can tell you that my girlfriend at the time was just horrified by the whole thing.
Not entertained?
She did not find me amusing at all in that moment.
No, all she got to feel was everyone's reaction to it.
Yeah, yeah.
So before we got into that, I was asking someone comes in with, let's say, an ankle issue. You see the pattern of that issue, both the physical pattern, but then also the orienting, anchoring, identifying pattern. Mm-hmm. The point is to bring awareness to that pattern,
right,
in them.
Right.
What is there? Do you experience that as awareness of all three at once? Do you experience a focus on a particular aspect of it, whether it's orienting, anchoring, identifying?
Right.
As you begin to do that work,
it'll vary. Because it'll depend on the state they're in. So, if they're anchoring more in this mental way, if they're orienting in this very cognitive, rational perspective, similar to are you going to engage someone mentally or emotionally? It's well, it kind of depends on what are they coming at you with at the time. And sometimes you sense, okay, I should just drop down and meet them emotionally right now. Sometimes I should meet them more mentally. So I intuitively gauge, how should I engage? The general process is I go into my intention is to go into a very conscious, open state and just let the information start showing up in my awareness. And then I'll, again, start to see this pattern. And
the pattern, their pattern?
Their pattern. And I'm saying that like I'm seeing it perfectly, and I'm being 100% objective and whatever. And of course I'm seeing what I'm seeing. But just like a golf pro is going to watch someone swing, and then they're going to go, okay, they're going to start seeing stuff immediately, right? Because they have their understanding of the golf swing, and then it's like that. So I start seeing stuff, and my attention gets drawn in a certain way. Again, we all do this, right? All the time. It's just how well are we doing it, and how able are we in any given moment to try to come from a conscious orientation. And of course it's always, well, what's the goal, right? But if someone comes into the room you're in, let's say, and starts whatever. If you take an extreme example, like in the movies, right? Someone comes into the restaurant and starts waving a gun around, or is in some kind of extreme weird state. It's well, initially you're just going to try to figure out what the hell's going on. And then let's say you're going to try to actually engage the person. But you're aware that okay, I can't this is a situation where the person's going to be highly defended, right?
Yeah.
And I'm saying that, okay, I'm always looking for places in people's system where they're highly defended. Because if they weren't, then there's no problem. So the extreme example of like the guy that goes into the bank and starts saying this is a robbery, or it's more like that. It's like I'm looking for those spots in a person's psyche where they're, where typically what I'm going to run into is the I will fucking kill you if you come near me place in their psyche. That's often the core of their core patterns always has that kind of thing going on.
How quickly do you pick up on that?
I mean, I can see it, quite immediately, but to actually get to it depends on, some people walk in the door and it's right there. Other people, just like some people walk in the door and they say, I'm suicidal. I'm having suicidal ideation. And it's like, okay, we don't have to dig,
Yeah.
like we're there already. And so it's like, all right. And then I'm immediately engaging them in a way that's as much as I can, very real, in the moment, energetically embodied. I see you. I feel you. I'm engaging the part of you that's suicidal. I'm not going to shift into a mode of, oh, well, tell me more about that. And what maybe if you think about life this way, it's like, no. Yeah. I'm engaging it like they're standing there with the gun in their hand saying I'm suicidal. I mean, we need that kind of immediate, that idea that we don't just want to be seen and we don't just want to be heard. We want to be felt.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our psyche, it's not satisfied with just being seen or heard. There's an energetic, embodied, vibratory feeling that needs to be felt.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets hard, because
then you have to feel it too.
Yeah, exactly. Because where we need to get felt, we aren't able to hold it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be needing it, right? We'd have already held it. And the feeling would have processed in the way it needs to process. So when we're coming at someone else and having a relational need, typically and this is just what happens in general. We don't, any kind of interaction, we're motivated to bring the stuff that we're struggling with to the other person. There's still some unresolved stuff, or we still can't make sense of it, we still can't tolerate it. And we bring it to the other person, hoping they'll hold it, hoping they'll feel it, right? They'll at least feel it with you.
Yeah.
Which is the holding and empathizing, right? And if they won't, if they just sit there and talk about it, but their system is refusing to feel it, it tends to be unsatisfying.
So if we're unconsciously bringing content that's unresolved, unconsciously bringing a place in us that we can't hold ourselves, sometimes, so like that's what's coming to you every day. And then the different responses to that initial holding of something that hasn't been held. Because it seems like that could really vary.
Yes.
Is it kind of like it could be shock, fear, disgust, shame, confusion.
Yeah, and often what is the case is the thing we need to be felt. Sometimes we're very willing to share it with the other person, but a lot of times the deeper thing that we really need to have felt, we're terrified and or ashamed to have the other person actually see it and feel it.
Right.
And we stay fixated on this other thing. It's like if I really need this deep shame in me and this awful experience that I'm really disgusting and, there's something wrong with me. It's like, really, the truth is I need you to feel that with me. But, for example, I might be stuck no, I just have murderous rage and I need you to see that and feel that. And you can be on 10 years into that going, Lance, I feel the murderous rage that you have, very clearly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's something beneath that. And the person will just kind of keep going back to that defensive feeling. and or it can be vice versa. They just keep being in this shameful, I'm a bad person, I'm whatever. And it's like, no, or yes, but it's like, yes, that feeling's there. You're having that experience, but there's a deeper experience that you're actually defending against. So it's very difficult, very confusing. And of course, you dip beneath the cognitive rational.
Right.
And then it really
because there's no source for it, or there's no like narrative behind how, or at least on the surface, that behind how those feelings layered on top of each other.
Right.
And so to get back to something that caused the primary defense, like you're saying, is irrational.
Yes. And it's very, very hard for people in general to shift out of the rational.
Yeah.
And allow the irrational. And
well, it has to be a break of some kind.
Yeah, it often that's what it takes. But this thing where Freud's technique was free association, and the idea was, let's set up an environment where you just start freely associating, and a bunch of irrational stuff's going to surface. Right? That was the idea. It was a technique that was designed to try to get at that part of the psyche. And then Jung, his technique was active imagination, and there was differences in active imagination versus free association, but the general idea was the same with regard to what we want to do is get you into an activated state, and then stay in that activated state and let content from that activated state surface, as opposed to immediately invalidating that experience because it's, because you're just activated. You're just triggered, or that's nonsensical, or that's inaccurate. It's like, let it keep going. That idea of like, oh, that was just a dream. It's like, yeah, but you can analyze the dream, right? Again, that's a big paradigm shift. To say there's validity, right? There's something
content,
there's something to be learned in the irrational experience. Just like with art, it's like, abstract art. It's like, well, don't just poo-poo it because it's not linear rational.
Formal, yeah.
What's the symbolic meaning in there, for example? But so, again, that's all fine conceptually, but it's one thing to look at a Dali painting and not just go, it's all warped. There's something wrong with it. It's like, no, he did that on purpose, But it's like when you go into the direct surreal experience in your own head, right? It's like, that's the imaginal. The imaginal is surreal.
Yeah.
And can you tolerate that and allow yourself to look at that in the moment instead of just desperately try to get back to a cognitive, linear, rational experience where you feel sane and you feel valid and you feel justified and you feel correct? Right?
Right. Well, you're not trying to prove something to someone else.
Yeah. Trying
to build a case for what your experience is and how you would explain it.
Yeah. So that's another big paradigm shift is, okay, some people understand that and go into therapy. It doesn't mean it's easy, but they understand, okay, I'm going to go do a therapy session. And the goal here is for me to dive into my irrational, unconscious stuff as opposed to just get justification for where I'm right, right, or find some fix, or like they're two very different goals, and they both have their place. There's a place for validation. There's a place for figuring out, analyzing, getting support, getting positive feedback. But depth psychotherapy, for example, that's not what that is.
Yeah.
And then again, this thing that people don't understand, that it's like, if you broke your nose, the experience of healing that broken nose, meaning energetically and therefore fascially and as far as your nervous system and all that, your mind has to face the experience of and I'm saying this because I've had my nose broken and I I've probably said this before in the podcast, but it's like I have my nose rolfed a zillion times. I worked with it in this way and that, just struggled energetically. Once I started to be able to feel chakras, I spent countless hours, wrestling with the energetics in my nose, and could just still tell there was just this tension and, stuff that affected my whole body. And then there was this shift where I went to a different level with regard to how I was orienting and anchoring and identifying, and was able to become aware of a part of my mind that was faced with the experience of my face is being demolished, or my face is being disfigured, and this is I'm either gonna die and or my you know what I mean? Like the experience in the moment that the psyche's gonna be up against is like, this is catastrophic. Everything from I'm gonna be mangled and disfigured to I'm gonna die, and the mind's hit with that, and of course I couldn't just stay present with that as the fist was contacting my face and pushing my nose to the side of my head. It's like in that split second, my psyche said, "See you later."
Yeah.
And I remember a certain time it happened. My nose was literally pushed over about 1 inch, and blood was running down the front of my face and shirt to where my shirt was blood soaked. And I was still in the midst I didn't even know what happened. And someone, after the incident, I was so jacked up, and then someone said, "Dude, like, you got to go look in the mirror. Your nose is broken bad." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I reached up and touched my nose and had this searing pain suddenly and went and looked in the mirror. But it was like, that's the level to which we can split is kind of incredible. And then my point is, 20 years later, I was still split and didn't know it. I went, in that incident, I went to the hospital, to the ER, and they said, "We can't set that. You got to get plastic surgery." I had to go get plastic surgery. I went under anesthesia, full anesthesia, woke up with a cast over my nose. And then, it healed. And then it's like, okay, I'm all good. But 20 years later, I came to realize, actually, I have sinus trouble and neck tension and some low back stuff going on. And I can't quite engage my core the way I used to. And I can't quite smell my food as well. And when something kind of gets near my face, I feel kind of jumpy in a way that someone's like, "I'm not even close to your face." And it's like, "Yes, you were." And, and it's like there's a long list of symptoms. And again, so I wrestled with it. But the fix was then I finally was able to bring my conscious attention back into the part of my mind that I couldn't tolerate when I was, and this is the big point, identifying even just that, let alone orienting my attention from my nose or from the part of my mind that's like was aware of, my face and nose, and just tolerating, oh, well, I'm going to accept this experience that my face is being mangled. It was just too much, I couldn't do it. But when I could step outside and orient my attention from conscious awareness and look back at the part of my mind that was faced with death and disfigurement, it felt awful. But when I could stay anchored in consciousness, I actually could allow it to process through. And when I did, I could feel it right away. As soon as I hit that part of my mind with my conscious attention and saw it and felt it, right? Because initially I witnessed it. And it was like, oh, shit, that, I was seeing a place in my psyche that I just hadn't seen. Yeah. But I suddenly was witnessing it. And then it was like, oh, I got to hold that. And then at first it was like I could feel the pull, like this magnetic pull. I wanted to go back into my mind and then leave that part of my mind and go out into my nose and just contract like crazy to put a fucking stop to that whole experience.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, wait, come back out. Witness that part of my mind. Okay, yep, that part of my mind just is like in this state of like this terrible experience. But I was like, okay, just hold it. All right, I could feel the energy start to move. And immediately it was like, oh my God, my nose started to kind of, it crackled a couple times, and I felt some tension release that I hadn't felt, in 20 years. And I suddenly felt kind of down through my spine, a certain kind of relaxing. And that was one of the big moments for me of, oh, this is, not only am I getting some change in my own system, but it was like, oh, I'm getting a better understanding of how all this shit works.
Right.
And so it's like, oh, now the client that's laying on the table who broke their leg or who got, terribly rejected or who got sexually abused or who, it's like, oh, they gotta bring their consciousness back to the part of their psyche that was overwhelmed, that made them split in the first place. We can't just work from these other levels without addressing that part, which again just became work on an entirely different level. Because we can talk about it forever. I could talk to you about, and then I was in this fight, and then my nose got broken. Well, how do you feel about that? Well, it's like to get at the actual experience in the psyche of experiencing what seems like certain death, or what seems like permanent disfigurement, or what seems like it's a tall order to try to jump in and experience it from there. You got to be aware of it, not from it or as it. Same with when I broke my arm. I worked with my arm, and I finally went back into, no, I gotta engage the part of my mind that experienced, oh my God, I'm losing my arm, or those deeper layers of the mind. They don't have the perspective to say, well, shit, my arm's broken, but I can go get it casted and it's going to be okay. That certain part of the mind just thinks it's over. It just is primal.
There's a way you described it. You hadn't described it before that really resonated for me, where you said the part of your psyche that experienced the break as disfigurement.
Yep.
So the part of the psyche that felt the face as self. Because that's not, like you're saying, that's not the part of the psyche or the part of the mind that needs to deal with it after the fact. And then becoming aware of that part, but not as it or from it, and bringing conscious awareness to the part of the psyche that's aware of the face. There's some steps there you spelled out. I hadn't heard you spell out before.
Okay. Yes, and we can split off from any one of those steps. Yeah. And it's crucial to figure out which one, because you can spend years and years and years working with a step that isn't really the problem. It's not the problem step.
Yeah.
The same broken nose, different people are going to split from different steps.
It's just, as you were saying it, like I felt my face in a different way.
Okay.
So it brought attention to some part of like my psyche that I hadn't really noticed before.
Yeah.
That could like have the face as it could have the face as a sense of, it's not even a sense of self. It's the face as an object that's self-contained, like that dimension of the physical experience I hadn't really located before.
Nice.
That you were talking about.
Right.
Because the other things, like you're saying, getting stuck in a different step of that, it's like forced or maintained isolation of that experience or of that physical part of self.
Yes, well put.
There's one thing that you brought up recently when we were doing some work on my hand, where you said you just need to let that be itself for a while. It's like, stop trying to go in and identify as the hand, or don't go in and like let your hand lead you around life. And it's like there's a certain healthy segmentation. So don't bring some part of the psyche to, like, bringing another dimension to that dimension isn't helping.
Yeah.
You've got to find the dimension that relates to that as itself.
Yeah.
Not as self, but as that part of you.
Right. And then do you see what I'm saying? Okay, that's like the computer analogy of which window are we talking about? Don't open the wrong window.
Right.
Because you're not going to get the problem fixed if you're not in the right window.
Right. There's also like, I just thought about like a parallax video error where you have like cascading images of the self because there's a feedback loop between the camera and so let's say you look at a camera of the zoom screen instead of the zoom screen itself, you're going to see 100 different instances and none of them are really what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
There was a thing we did. We were talking after a session while I was back, and there was like a receiving thing that I did. And you were like, it feels like I was receiving you. Mm-hmm. And so I've been trying to do that more. And I wanted to know, like, where does that fit within like witnessing, holding, containing, mirroring, and contact?
Typically the receiving is the holding because the receiving is the empathizing.
Okay.
However, it gets more nuanced because you can receive but not be, you can be taking data in but not, I'm just going to use computer analogy, and let's say not downloading it. So you can be hearing me, but just kind of letting it go right through. Right. It's like, oh, you're receiving me. It's like, yeah, but it's not landing. Yeah. It's like, well, that's not, like receiving is really being a receiver that it's landing on, not just an empty vessel that I'm.
Yep, I get that. Yeah.
And so that's an important thing to actually, but to receive it and have it land, that takes some work on your end. Like that's a higher.
I have to acknowledge the part of me it impacts.
Yeah, well put. And that's part of that thing when I say we want to be felt. We want what we're feeling to fucking impact somebody. It's just this human need. And it sucks when it's like, I feel murderous rage. And so, Jeff, I want you to be impacted by my murderous rage. And it's like, well, shit, it's a tall order.
Yeah. How do you balance the part of yourself that knows that it's within them and within you and you don't want to feel it right now, but like, how do you acknowledge it enough to not, pull out your phone and yell into it?
Right.
Okay. That makes sense. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.